Hello everybody, my name is Daulton Nelson and today I'd like to give my thoughts on a game I just beat. That game being Cuphead for the PC. Cuphead was developed and published by Studio MDHR Entertainment Incorporated, and it is a 2D action platformer. In terms of fantastic independent games over the past couple years, it could be argued that no other gaming software has come close to the build-up, release, and now post-release status that Cuphead has. Raving reviews, industry respect, successful merchandising, nostalgia on multiple fronts, constant positive press, and now a presence on multiple platforms including PC, Xbox, and Switch, has Cuphead poised to be a game that will definitely be remembered and celebrated for years to come. So it should come as no surprise that I'm playing this game for the same reason as others might be, which is to join in on the fun that Cuphead as a game supposedly offers. Now, I did have my worries going into this game. When most people talk about the Cuphead experience, there will mostly be two talking points that are brought up: the game's animation and the game's difficulty. For those of you who are unaware, most of Cuphead's animation is in a traditional hand-drawn rubber hose style, with a lot of effort put in on the developer's part to make the game look like its 1930s influences. Normally, when I hear that a game puts a big emphasis on animation, I start having flashbacks to games where the animation starts to get in the way of the gameplay. Max Payne 3 comes to mind, with its stiff and awkward movements caused by animations having to transfer from one to another on completion, before control was handed back to the player. Thankfully, Cuphead's controls feel very fluid throughout its length, making it a very satisfying game to both play and look at. There is so much creativity put into each and every frame of Cuphead and its environments. There are a few background elements that are clearly rendered in 3D, but for the most part, MDHR's animation style is consistent and fantastic. Which brings me to my second worry going into the game. Cuphead is a game that is marketed to be very tough. But not just any kind of tough, as Cuphead is touted as being old school tough. What people mean by saying this is that the difficulty of Cuphead has some base in older video game titles that sported a high difficulty. Again, whenever I hear developers use this descriptor of their game's difficulty, I start to worry a bit. First of all, I'm no opponent of tough games. Ikaruga, Dark Souls, and Alien Soldier are all games I enjoy very much. However, a game being tough does not automatically equate to a fun experience. It takes some great design insight to pull off a game like that. Second of all, this kind of game has become very common in the independent games industry. I feel as if my excitement for this kind of difficulty peaked at Shovel Knight. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that I was going into Cuphead fully ready for the challenge, with the hope that MDHR wouldn't inherit some of the more frustrating aspects of older titles into their game. And again, Cuphead excels. The game is very tough, and I died quite a bit. But throughout the game, I always had fun running through a boss multiple times, while learning the nuances to their attack patterns. Beating bosses would cause me to yell out in victory, and take a victory lap around my room. So with my initial concerns taken care of, it became much easier to note the other parts of Cuphead that make it what it is. Starting out with its structure, Cuphead is a game where each level is a boss you must beat, kind of like Alien Soldier, but without the short prelude levels preceding the boss. Each boss has their own attack patterns that you must learn and overcome, as well as each boss being a multi-layered fight, with every boss going through a series of phases that can change the fight dynamically. The way you go about fighting these bosses is accessing their fights through a retro game-inspired world map, where the player can walk around to these clearly animated landmarks and interact with them. This world map is pretty well realized, with the aesthetics of the map hinting toward the type of boss you're going to face, like walking to a garden to fight a garden-based boss. However, the world map as a whole is not open to you right away. There are obstacles that are placed on the map to stop you from wandering through the entire scene from the start. Instead, beating a boss will clear these obstacles, thus allowing you to fight more bosses and progress. This world map is also separated into 3, or 4 if you include the end, world sections that can only be accessed by beating all of the bosses located within that section of the world. To help you along the way, Cuphead gives you a few abilities to help bring down the bosses in the game. As an action platformer, Cuphead moves around and jumps in a 2D plane and can shoot on command. Holding down the shoot button will initiate auto-fire. Cuphead can shoot in 5 directions, to the sides, the diagonals, and straight up. He can also crouch, which shortens his collider and allows him to shoot lower to the ground than normal. Shooting diagonally will have Cuphead move and shoot at the same time, so MDHR included a button that will lock Cuphead in place at any time. In addition to these basic run and gun controls, Cuphead also has a dodge ability that will cause him to quickly rush in the side direction he's facing. This can allow him to hastily dodge any attack coming at him. Finally, Cuphead has a super attack he can initiate depending on how much value his super meter has, which is represented by these cards located right next to his health. How you fill up this meter can be done in 2 ways. The first is just hitting objects with your shots. The other is by using the parry move that Cuphead has correctly. By correctly, I mean anything pink in the game can be parried. As long as you have your timing right, pulling this move off successfully gives you 1 whole card, with a maximum of 5 cards being a fully charged meter. Accompanying the gameplay here is a fantastic score provided by a big band led by Toronto drummer and composer Christopher Madigan. The band here delivers some great tracks that are all based within the spectrums of jazz. There are a lot of fast, bustling compositions that go along very well with the frantic action found within Cuphead's gameplay, with a few more laid-back tracks sparsed throughout the game, including the few tracks with vocals on them, like the Cuphead theme or King Dice's theme. The soundtrack as a whole gives a lot of charm and authenticity to the game's aesthetics. Overall, Cuphead as a whole delivers some pretty fantastic moment-to-moment gameplay. However, I do feel as if the game has its shortcomings. The most visible negative here is with the use of one of the random number-generated instances in the game. Now, every boss within Cuphead features some form of RNG. Mostly in the form of attack patterns, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. It's when MDHR starts to use it for platform generation is where I start having a problem. Now, this only happens within 2 or 3 levels in the game, but it's still annoying to deal with nonetheless. Mainly what happens here is that some of the bosses within the game feature a bottomless pit players could fall into and take damage from. The few levels I mentioned earlier will automatically scroll in a direction while randomly generating platforms for the player to stand on, and avoid falling into the bottomless pit. I can understand what MDHR is trying to do here, but the problem is that when platform positions generate randomly, there are going to be gaps in the generated platforms that the player can't really avoid. Especially when dealing with the game's tough bosses, players aren't going to be focusing on these platforms all the time. There were a few times where I had to take unavoidable damage just because there were no platforms present for me to switch to. The second grievance I have with the game comes with the way Cuphead treats its coins. You see, sprinkled throughout the game are these side-scrolling run-and-gun levels that play like your standard action platformer. You go from left to right fighting smaller enemies until you reach the end. Throughout each of these levels are 5 coins you can collect. The amount of coins you've collected is the amount of coins that's added to your total in the world map. Players use these coins to buy items that can expand Cuphead's arsenal, like different kinds of weapons or abilities that you can equip before entering another level. Unfortunately, I don't think these side-scrolling levels are very fun. In fact, the few I played through felt very annoying and frustrating, mainly because it felt like the level would constantly spawn hostile game objects to get in the player's way. MDHR rarely gives the player any time to breathe in these levels, and thus it almost feels like a false difficulty is being placed over top of you. This is a shame, especially since there's this grading system MDHR put in the game to help the player gauge how well they did in a boss fight. I think rewarding coins based on how the player graded would have been better than putting them in these side-scrolling levels. Mentioning the other weapons in the game bring me to my final negative criticism for Cuphead. I rarely felt incentivized to use any other weapons or abilities in the game beyond the pea shooter, the chaser, and the smoke bomb. The pea shooter is the weapon you start the game with, while the chaser acts similarly to the chaser weapon within Gunstar Heroes. The weapon shoots these green stars that collects the position of whatever damageable object is closest to them, then uses that data to head right toward the object. The chaser is a little slower and weaker than the pea shooter, but in my opinion, not by a significant margin. The smoke bomb changes the dodge move a bit so that Cuphead is invincible while executing it, with the only downside to the ability being that Cuphead disappears and reappears in a puff of smoke, rather than rushing to the side in one quick visible motion. This setup, with the exception of one boss in the beginning of the game, stayed constant throughout my playthrough. Mostly this is because I can't think of a situation where I would need the boomerang or charge or lobber or whatever other abilities that exist within the game, coupled with the fact that you only can get these weapons by purchasing them with the coins, which you can't get any other way than going through the frustrating side-scrolling levels. But other than that, I had a very fun time playing through Cuphead here. I can see why many people take a liking to it. I'm going to give it a final score of an 8 out of 10. The entire game is fun, challenging, and full of this passionate, charmful aesthetic that will make Cuphead a mainstay in your head when you're thinking about quality independent games. I don't think it's perfect, but Cuphead absolutely is worth your time and energy, so make sure to give it a swig. That concludes my review of Cuphead. If you like my reviews, you can like, comment, or subscribe. I also have social media links down in the description below, as well as a link to my online Portfolum, where you can see video game works that I have done. And with that out of the way, please make sure to have a nice day.